Hi, everybody. Thank you for joining the third video that's part of the What to Expect When Working with an Architect series. We'll be talking with you today about what might the process look like. You have Christy with FEH Design. I am a principal and a library architect with 20 years of experience in the field.
And I'm Gregg Bauman with FEH. I'm considered a library design expert because of how many communities I've actually got to work with and how many times I've gotten to do this. So I'm really happy here to share the knowledge that we've gained.
And Gregg has 20 years of experience as well, plus a little bit, just a little. Okay, so our discussion today will focus on an overview of the steps that a typical project will take from site selection to occupancy. So we are going to take you on a crash course through the process that we deal with every day. And we are going to start with just a very brief comment about the role of an architect. And that is to be the owner's advocate throughout the design and construction process. I have a vested interest in giving you, the owner, the best project that I possibly can at the best price. So I am your advocate as we work through both the design to keep you on track and make sure that you have your end goals in mind as we go through the design process, and then also work with you on the construction side to take any of those fundraised dollars and stretch them as far as I can. Gregg, take us through typical stages of the process.
So typical stages is such a relative term because every single project is going to have its own path moving forward. But these are really the highlights of things that you will encounter one way or another as you go through your process. So the first one being planning. Essentially, this is starting with your space needs and making sure that you have all of the information you need to know what the community wants and needs in its library. The next step in the process is once you have that information, you really are going to want to look at where is the money going to come from. It could be through donated dollars, it could be through grants that are available to you, and it could be through the municipality or any combination of those three. Following that, once you've had your fundraising activities well in hand, that's really when you're going to start your design of your actual project, whether it be a remodeling, a renovation, a reimagination, or a brand new facility. And once you have your design secured, your funding is in place, and your approvals, you will then really start to develop the detailed drawings that go into a project. There's many phases to that, which we will cover in a high level of detail. And then you go through the actual public bidding of your projects to contractors that will actually want to do the work. And the bidding is not only for the construction of the building, but it's also for all of the contents of the building. So that would include your furniture and your furnishings and your audiovisual equipment. All of those video things really need to be part of the overall project. And then once you have a successful bid that matches your budget and a contractor in hand, and you've gone through the contractual portion of the project, you'll actually then get to start into the physical construction of the building. So this is really an exciting time when you see your project taking shape and you get to see actual in live time, real decisions that you've made and what does that manifest into. And the community gets pretty excited when they see, if it happens to be a new building, when that goes up, or if it's a complete renovation of your existing structure, and of course then is occupancy.
And everybody gets really excited at the start of construction because there are usually gold shovels involved, like that picture you can see on the screen for groundbreaking. So having some sort of commemoration to kick a project off is a very big deal on the construction side because that's what all your donors are waiting for. So a typical process would involve the library doing strategic planning and making a priority the expansion or construction of a new space or meeting the space needs through some sort of manner. So the strategic planning is something that is not typically part of an architect's role and not what we're going to talk about today, but having that set as a starting point to make it a priority with the library and the community is a very important first step. Space needs, Gregg?
So space needs analysis, there's a number of different components that go into this. And again, this session won't focus on that specifically, but what I will say is that there's a couple of different levels of ways of obtaining information for space needs. There are worksheets out there that are very useful tools to help find out what a 20-year time horizon might look like. And then there's actually the physical program document that follows that up for larger projects most often, that really gets into details about which each department and each collection needs to have and what other types of information that you want to make sure you meet your needs of your community. So all three of those steps are really kind of a pre-designed checklist before this timeline of really looking at how a project goes from coming out of the site all the way through construction.
Yep, so you know you need to do something, and you know how large that something needs to be, and you know what the pieces are that go into that something. What the heck do you do next? So we typically do a goals for success process where we work with the core planning committee or the owners group or whomever is part of that process to set the high level goals for the process, where you set your criteria for what's irrefutable and what am I trying to achieve with my project. And then we work with the owner to develop conceptual designs using public input. And that is part of a previous video that you'll be seeing from a different entity. But we work with the public to create conceptual designs and then conceptual budgets with healthy contingencies. Everybody knows what the construction industry is doing in terms of costs lately. So you have to make sure that all of your costs are included in that conceptual budget. So you've got your goals, you've got your design, you've got those contingencies, and then you're ready to look at your sites. Gregg, let's talk site selection.
So when we think about site, there are a number of items here that we've listed that really address different components of what has to happen to make a site adequate for what you're trying to accomplish. But I just wanted to again emphasize what Christy just said about the community-driven process. Often site selection is part of a community process as well. So while it may seem intuitive to say that we're going to do a community process, it really overlaps with everything that you're going to do moving through this project, in our opinion. So proper zoning is the first item that we've listed. There's many things that go into zoning. Whether it be setbacks, whether it be wetlands, whether it be parking requirements, height restrictions. There's a number of components that you need to really check off the boxes with your professional to make sure that wherever you're planning on doing your project, if you're looking at a new site, that you have all of those things in place. As I mentioned, parking is another component. Walkability is a component for a specific site. We again list the goals for success. Again, with high-level goals being created for this project, site would have to respond to those goals as well. So we mentioned that for that purpose. Community amenities. There's often a number of things within a community that really drive what the community is all about, and that the library would like to be part of that and be a partner to that. Again, a specific site may lend itself more to that than another. And finally, we list the library as an economic driver. We found that that's often a very desirable component when we look for sites for libraries, and it's really specific to using it as a catalyst for maybe doing something else that the community has in mind. It's another good way of promoting library is being something much larger than its own entities and its own four walls.
Yep, you need to consider the ripple effect of whatever you're doing. So that is an important consideration. And going back to the goals for success, a lot of times the goals will reference accessibility, they'll reference walkability or proximity to schools. So those are all important considerations to keep in mind as you consider the different sites that you might have available. So here is a map of a project that we have worked on in a town that identifies, I believe we have 30 different sites in town here, and they're all different colored boxes. So what we did as part of this process is first you have to identify the sites. And so oftentimes an impartial third party can be helpful, like an architect coming in and asking if certain sites are available. And then we evaluated these sites using the goals and criteria that we set, like not in a floodplain or walkable to the downtown area. And so the existing library is box number 1, that little tiny red box that you see on the left side of the floodplain there. And so based on the criteria that the group had set, site 6 was selected, and that was a public driven process, came up with a bunch of different designs. And here you go. These are the options that were generated as part of the public driven process. We've got a complete site plan. We know the size of our building. We know that it will be a new building, and we've got our outdoor areas highlighted. We've got our parking accounted for. So all of the pieces have been clarified as part of the conceptual design process. So you know how big it needs to be, you know generally what it's going to cost. Then you would need to consider fundraising and how you're going to find dollars to pay for your project. Greg?
So fundraising has a number of steps to it, and it often results in hiring an outside consultant beyond the architect to be part of the team. We always recommend having this team be involved from the beginning all the way through the project, because there's a lot of going back and forth between the parts and the pieces. This is, a moving, living study, and all of this is going to have to work together to make it successful. So when we talk about a financial feasibility and a capital campaign, usually the first step in that process is conducting a feasibility study to try to test the ability of what the community has in terms of giving. Again, not any two communities approach this exactly the same. This is a general process. Some communities may have the ability to have the municipality provide all of the funds for their project. But most often we find this capital campaign as being a needed entity for making a project move forward. So after the feasibility study is done and a range of dollars are developed, usually the consultant then wants some visualizations of what the project might be and look like, so they can go and test the waters, if you will. And they may do that through a survey. They may get public reaction and input into that process. So once they have that information and they can identify what they think is a successful number that you can raise through a capital campaign, then really the second phase of this is actually doing the capital campaign itself. It's usually a separate step. It can take anywhere from 6 months to over a year.
Years.
Depending on the size of the project. So there's a number of different, ways that you can do a capital campaign through a number of different sources. All of that information is tracked. There's a group and a team that really gets involved with making sure all of that's recorded properly. And then that's coordinated with the municipality to make sure that all of those dollars are being put into a safe place. If it's a municipal-led project, those dollars will end up eventually needing to go to the municipality for expenditure to the project at a later date. All of those things really just need to be covered and identified so that all of these steps can be put in process and it can run very smoothly.
Yep. And oftentimes when you're doing fundraising, those dollars will go through a friends group or a foundation. So you have the 501c3 benefit, and then it's negotiated on how those funds would potentially get transferred to the municipality on an as-needed basis, or set that up however works best for all parties involved. So we made it through fundraising. We've got our conceptual design. We've got our dollars. Where do we start? Holy buckets, you've got a project. This is going to be exciting. So we're going to take you through the phases of design. First thing we would recommend is that you establish a core committee. So oftentimes that core committee will be board members, city administrator or somebody, city clerk, village clerk, library director, and oftentimes friends, foundation, and members of the public who are invested in the project, but we don't want that group to get too big. So we would recommend that you keep it in the 6 to 8 people for decision-making purposes, because that group needs to be nimble to decide your heading, so to speak. And Gregg mentioned this earlier, there are different phases of design. Why don't you go through those, Gregg?
So the conceptual design was established when we looked at site, and it gave kind of an overview and a vision for what the project is, but none of the details were really established at that point for what does that space really look like? What does it feel like? What are the real highlights that we want to include? So schematic design really is that first step to really flush out and come up with the creative aspect of your project to say we want to have specific features in certain areas, and we can go department by department involving staff in each case, or it can be done by any other number of core committee members or groups. You can see a sketch here happens to be an inspiration sketch for a project where we wanted to make sure we were taking advantage of utilizing some products that were germane to this particular location. And we incorporated those into the overall design aspect of it. Your project will likely have those same kinds of opportunities in different ways, in different departments, and it just depends what's specifically unique to who you are. But schematic design is really that time for that inspiration to be shared with the architect so that we can make sure that it's being incorporated into the overall solution. Big decisions made early in the process have far greater impact than making decisions at the very end of a project, getting it out for bid. So we really would like to hear all of the inspiration and the ideas that you have to make sure that we as a team can then help deliver on those. Sometimes those are also embedded in those goals for success that we talked about. Again, a very important set of directions, if you will, for us to make sure that the entire team on a project, which is made up of architects, engineers, interior designers, audiovisual people, everybody working towards that common goal. So schematic design is really identifying all of the components that are going to make your library and the vision that you have in mind special.
And something to note here is that when you get started on your phases of design, you're going to need a contract, and you're going to need that contract to protect you as the owner and also to protect the designer. So we would typically recommend using an AIA owner architect agreement, which is something that you can look up if you'd like to, but that protects both the architect and the consultants and you as the owner from anything that might arise during construction. And we're taking you through the phases of design that typically go along with a design, bid, build project. So we design it, it will go out for bid, and then it will get constructed. So just two kind of footnotes that go along with what Gregg has stated so far.
Okay, let's talk a little bit about design development. This particular phase is really, think about it as we have the vision, we have the creative aspects of the project identified. Now comes the real detailed design where we're actually looking at specific components within the building. So we're looking at systems, we're looking at furniture, we're looking at how the AV is wired and managed throughout the entire building. What do those components look like? What are those needs? So we're really getting into, I guess I would say, the real details, the nuts and bolts, if you will, of what goes inside this project that really makes the big vision come to life. And again, at the end of each of these phases, schematic design and design development, we do update the project budget. That's, again, a very critical component so that any shifts in the industry that have happened that have affected anything that we are planning on doing can be adjusted, can be modified, can be enhanced possibly, just depending on where costs happen to be going. Again, it's a moving target. Nothing is static about costing in a real world. They change pretty regularly, and you really should expect from your team to be able to manage that budget as well.
Yep, and design development is where the engineers would get involved. So they might have been preliminarily involved with schematic design, but those mechanical, electrical, plumbing, IT, AV, fire protection, those engineers would all be involved in design development. That helps to get a more refined cost estimate. And then it also does allow coordination between the library system and the design team, because the library system is an important piece of how this building is going to work on the IT side, and we have to make sure that we play well. So that is in design development.
So next step in the design process is construction documentation. This phase of the project, some of it's done behind the scenes. It's not quite as intense on the end user side, if you will. There will still be regular meetings and there will be questions to be answered. But this is really when the entire team of architects, engineers, and interior people coordinate all of these different systems to be able to express the full vision that you had in mind for your project. So it's more technical in nature. You can see the little sketch kind of underneath the pretty colorful sketch, that there's a drawing that's done on the computer that, again, really has a lot of structural grid lines, and it has door swings, and it has code implications. Really all of the things that really need to go in to make the building efficient and to make it work. But again, there will be opportunity for questions, especially when it comes to things like service points, millwork, and coordination of that technology, and how the wireless access works. All of those things are really identified in construction documents. And it really involves one of Christy's favorite things, going through really technical stuff like door hardware.
I knew you were gonna say it. I knew it. Yes, door hardware is my favorite. That's okay, not my total favorite, but I do enjoy the challenge of door hardware and talking about access control and how a building is going to function so that it will work best for the library. So that is important, and talking about before-hour library access, if that's needed, depending on deliveries, and kind of coordinating all of those intricacies. Yes, thank you for mentioning that, Gregg. Don't forget about the furniture. So we built this building and we have to put stuff in it.
So furniture design really follows its own timeline, separate kind of from the building, in the sense that the decisions that need to be made on furniture really aren't usually part of the same bid package of construction that goes out to actually build whatever it is that you're doing out of bricks and mortar. So what I mean by that specifically is detailed furniture and decisions on whether things have casters or they're on wheels, or what the finishes are, or what the end panels look like. While they may be part of the overall vision, this bid package is sent out to a different set of contractors. Again, it's designed, it's bid, and it's built. Same process that Christy mentioned on the building side, but to a different set of people that actually provide those products. And furniture design can have a significant impact on the actual construction of a building. Whether or not you're moving to a separate location for a temporary basis for your project, or whether you're remaining open in your current location, it can involve several different steps. But essentially, this process really starts during the design development and construction document phase, and it takes a little bit longer time than when your bids come back on your actual building. So timing wise, it's a little bit delayed, I would say, from the actual building construction, but it's really done that way by design so that you can change as you need to change the actual package and the coordination of those items with the building itself to make sure that they are, in fact, you have power where you need power, you have, technology where you need technology. All of those things are part and parcel to one another, but they don't happen at the same exact time.
Yep, and the furniture budget, it's always that one that's not part of building construction that, well, depending on what funds we have left, we'll consider what we want to do for furniture, but you kind of need shelves to hold your collection. So the furniture budget is important to keep in mind throughout the process, because you do need furniture, but maybe you could reuse some pieces, or you could do it in phases where you would order most of the furniture, and then as donors might come forward, once the building is open, you could add to your furniture pieces. Okay, you have a design, you're ready to go out for bid. Here comes the paperwork. There's a lot of paperwork associated with the construction side and with the bidding side as well, but that's why you have an architect to help you through the process. So we will help you advertise for bid, promote your project to contractors, attend a pre-bid meeting. Depending on the size of your project, we want all the contractors, if possible, to walk through the site to make sure they're familiar with it before they put a number together, because the drawings are not perfect and they need to be aware of any existing conditions. And then bidding will often be 3 to 4 weeks, depending on the size of your project. And then the bids will come in and you make your way through that process. As soon as you get your bids, generally they're opened, and then you will take a week or so to confirm that everything that you anticipate and that you want included in the bids based on the bid documents is included. And then the architects would make a recommendation to award to the library board that then would go to the municipality, depending on the approval process. So you've got a bid, it's been accepted, you have an owner contractor agreement, and then construction starts. Then you get out those gold shovels and you have your groundbreaking and you start your construction process, which whenever I do a construction process, it always seems like it takes a little while to get started. So don't expect it to start the day after bids or the day after the contract. It takes a while to get it mobilized and to get a contractor on site, get the fencing, get all the ducks in a row, so that you can then start your regular, typically every other week, depending on your contract with the architect, every other week construction meetings. Because it's nice to have the architect on site and the design team to make sure that construction is progressing in the manner that the bid documents say. So unless you are a very savvy library director, you might want some help with that. And during construction, there are change orders, which change the construction price based on revisions that are listed as proposal requests. Like I said, it's a lot of paperwork. And then at the end of the project, you would generate a punch list. So a punch list is a list of items for the contractor to fix or resolve before the project would be considered complete. And once those items have been resolved, you can move into your building, and we would work with the municipality to make sure you have your certificate of occupancy and that all of the construction pieces are complete and that the building is functioning the way that it is supposed to, and you move in. Either using a volunteer group made up of burly high school sports team players to move all those heavy books, or you would work with a moving company or something like that to get your items moved into your new building or moved within your building to where they need to go. And you get that grand opening, you get that ribbon cutting, and hopefully you have a big fat red ribbon that you can put across the doors so that you can take pictures of the very important opening of your library. The grand opening does not need to correspond with your first day of being in the building. It's nice to get your feet under you and make sure you understand how the building will work before the public is in there officially with that red ribbon to help you celebrate your grand opening. And then we would recommend that you have, it's called a 1-year warranty walkthrough. Generally with new construction, you will get a 1-year warranty on your building. So at month 11, after your punch list and your substantial completion date, you would want to walk through with the contractor and the architect to see if there's anything that's not working right. So I can't stress this enough. You have a 1-year, like all-inclusive bumper to bumper warranty here. So let's make sure that any items that are a concern or an issue are noted within that 1-year period. Hopefully, we have made it clear the importance of the role of an architect as your advocate throughout the process, both design and construction. It's what we do. It's why we like doing library buildings, because we enjoy libraries, but being your advocate is just, it's fun. We get to explain the process, and it's we enjoy it, right, Greg?
Got it. That's why we're
That's,
doing this
yeah,
video.
that's why we're doing this video, and that's why we do what we do. So we're going to run through a few frequently asked questions. Oftentimes the question is, where do I start? So hopefully we've answered that. And we'll take you to a few more questions. Boop, boop, boop. Hey, Greg, when do you provide progress updates to the library board?
Yeah, this is a question that we see quite frequently, and it's not just the library board, it's also to the community. Often people want to be in the know, especially when they see progress being made, or perhaps it's an interior renovation and they can't see anything. So our recommendation is that you provide regularly scheduled updates to both the board and to the community. There's various ways of doing that, whether it be through a website or whether it be through a newsletter that you put out or something that you post on another community bulletin board. But we find that those regular updates really are very helpful to keeping people informed as to what's going on, and it really helps build to the excitement.
Yes, and another thing is, before your project starts, if you have a site, putting a sign on the site saying future site of the library, like just keeping the momentum going and providing those updates are important from just a logistical standpoint, but also important to your donors, and they can keep your momentum, because sometimes that fundraising process can take a while.
So Christy, who will operate the building systems when construction is complete?
That is a great question. That really depends on your municipality and the size of your building, because there are a few ways that you can do this. The most often I see the library director trying to do all the things, which can be very difficult. So it is important that everybody involved in the design side give input on your expectations on how the building will function, and if there's a level of user friendliness that's required because you don't have a facility manager or you don't have somebody on the municipal side who's willing to take over that piece. If the library director or library staff have to operate the building, you're going to want it to be user friendly. So oftentimes it's the library director, sometimes it's on the municipal side, and sometimes there's a dedicated facility manager for the building. It really depends on how your municipality and your staff is structured. Hey, Greg, what's expected of me in this process if you're an owner?
Boy, librarians have the I guess I would call it the privilege of wearing so many hats during this process. It's really our responsibility to help guide you through this process, but anybody who's in a position of being a librarian and in charge of a project really has to be, I would say, the communications coordinator. That's probably the number one thing that I would say is important to have a hat in the ring for the fundraising, to have a hat in the ring for helping the staff figure out what they're going to get and how we're going to provide those specific components that you want in your library, to being the cheerleader to help make sure that everything is going according to plan, and to help the core team make all of the right decisions going out throughout this process. There's going to be decisions that will be made daily. So the timing of all of those decisions is critical to keeping the project on track, and having that communications channel to know how I get to make those decisions and when those decisions get made. I would say that's something that you really have to look at very hard and fast when you take on a project, to know that your days of just being a librarian are really not going to look quite the same until the project is complete. It's a large undertaking and it's a lot of work, but it's also very rewarding, especially to the community when you get it all done.
And that's also why it's important to have somebody on your side to help you through the process. Have an architect you trust help you with it.
So Christy, who's in charge of making money decisions during construction?
Oh, that's a great question, Greg. And that's probably why it's a frequently asked one. But money decisions. So we mentioned a core committee during design. It can be that same committee, or you can assemble a construction committee. So money decisions during design would go back to that core committee, and then if needed, go to the library board for input if you are potentially over budget, or if you're trying to decide between two potential scenarios. Once you start construction, hopefully you've got a construction committee with a tenured, at least maybe one person who's done construction before in any fashion, so that they can provide input. And you work with that group as things arise, because during construction, you're gonna dig up something unexpected, or you're gonna uncover a wall that isn't where you thought it was, or it has something buried in it, or you're gonna find things happen. The drawings aren't perfect, and maybe there are cost-saving opportunities that you need to evaluate. So that would be with a construction committee, often with the library director, maybe some board members, and a tenured construction individual.
And I think one other tip that we would recommend to anybody undertaking a project is to make sure that you have a construction contingency fund set aside in addition to the money that's been allocated already to the project for construction. And what we mean by that is if you take a percentage of your overall project budget, 5% or 10%, and you have that money available for construction related design changes or decisions that need to be made that affect cost, you don't necessarily then have to go back and try to figure out how am I going to come up with those extra dollars. They've already been allocated. Your professional will already have an idea of how much money they would recommend you set aside for overages or things that happen during construction. And our goal is to always end up with money left over.
Yep.
So I think that's a healthy way to do this. When we said earlier about having a healthy construction budget, it's not just the money for construction, but it's also that money for a contingency to take care of things that do come up.
Yes, you need to expect the unexpected, and one of the ways you do that is through the contingency. Yep, good point. And look for a checklist of steps to be available on a recap of this process and the parties involved. And we want to thank you for your listening to us talk you through this video. Hopefully you found it helpful. Gregg and I are with FEH Design, hence the purple. So thank you for listening to us, and a thank you to these partners and sponsors for this video. Bye.
See ya.